morning, everyone. Good morning. It's Wednesday. That means we're back and we're going to finish part 2 of our bell. So let me just switch this over to this scene. There we go. Yes, good morning and welcome once again. It's another Watercolor Wednesday. And last week I started a Christmas bell, and we got as far as the background and the greenery, but we didn't get the bell itself done, so that's why we have part 2. So I'm looking forward to this, and I see that everybody's signing in from wherever you are, and for some of you it's afternoon, I guess. Yeah, we got Belgium, UK, Ontario, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, let me see, Wisconsin, Washington, all over the place. Thank you so much. I always appreciate hearing where you're from. It's so fun. So let's take a look now at our piece. Let's see if I can get this lined up a little bit better. There we go. And we got our nice rich background in there. Now keep in mind, this background is much richer because the printout that I'm using, pardon me, is it just printed on regular copy paper. Sorry. There we go. All right, so this was just printed on regular copy paper, so you know the colors come out a little bit dull and that sort of thing. So once I've actually got it painted on here, it looks a lot richer again, a little bit more like what you see here in the screen image. So I'm going to start today maybe with this ribbon. Now I had mentioned that this is a different red than what we used in the background. This background was a little bit of a pinkier red, whereas I want to use something a little bit more orange red or Christmas red for this tie here. So I'm going to start simple. I will just mix up an orangey red. The one that I'm using here is Rose D'Or. In fact, I'll mention what all of my materials are here. I'm working on Arches 140-pound cold press paper, which I have pre-stretched. The overall size of this the finished painting is going to be 8 by 10, so my paper is a little bit larger than that. Most of my paints that I'm using are DaVinci Watercolors, and my brushes are mostly squirrel hair brushes, but I do have some synthetics that I might use as well. And I'm just looking at comments. Everybody's from all over the place. Thank you. All right, so I am going to come in with this Rose D'Or. And as I think I mentioned this last week during part 1, is that when you paint reds, they always turn out a little bit duller than what they look like when they're wet. So I usually will go a little bit brighter with my reds so that they don't end up being too dull in the end. If you mix the exact color that you think you want, let it dry, because if you let it dry, you'll discover that, oh, it's not as bright as I thought, you know. So go ahead and do that. I have a bit of masking on here still from last week, and that was because I needed to do these needles, but now that I'm painting the actual ribbon, I need to remove this, of course. I did have a little bit of masking fluid in a couple of other places on my bell, but not very much at all. Most of my bell, I'm just going to be painting directly. Just there was a couple of little spots that I chose as an exception to that. All right. So I'm going to jump right in. Just a bright red. That's all I'm going to use for the moment, because I'm going to let that dry and then I'll come in and add my shadows. So the trick here is to sort of not overlap your lines, but certainly the masking has made this process easier. being able to paint this and not painting it over top of a green. You can't paint the needles and then put the the red on top, because of course red and green being complements are going to give you this nasty color, well, kind of a dull dark color, because they cancel each other out. They're complements. And last week when we were doing our demonstration, we had some clown come in and start spamming the chat. Don't worry about that kind of thing. That they can't do anything to your computer or anything like that. All they can do is just kind of interrupt and just cause trouble. But it's not anything that's going to give you a virus or anything like that. They're just being a pain in the butt. So just ignore it. I will catch that and report it if anything like that happens. So I'm just painting this in. I am working on dry here. This is not such a large area that I would need to wet this first. But I am working fairly quickly. I want to keep this paint moving so that I don't get brush marks in it, obviously. There's like a little knot of some kind here, because the tag was added on separately from the rest of it. Just painting this in. So once this is dry, I can come back to adding in the shadows, and some of those shadows are going to be a little bit of a cooler red. So this is a warm red, and I'll come in with the shadows with a cooler red. So I'm already determining that my highlights are warm, my shadows are cool, and even though they're both reds, I will still need to do that. Okay, so almost missed a spot there, so I want to be careful that I don't paint something I don't want to. Try to get rid of those little white slivers. There, okay. So I've got that color in there. It does look a little brighter than it needs to be, but like I said, it's just a matter of exaggerating it a little bit. I want to have enough of the white paper showing through that red color, because I want that to look like a highlight. Now I'm going to come down and do something similar with this tag. This tag is predominantly a yellow, but I'm going to go very, very light first of all. I'm going to start with a gamboge hue. So this gamboge hue is a nice bright yellow, but I'm going to really thin it down because I don't want too much on there. And I will just paint this in. Being careful not to hit my red there. Really, really pale. I'm not even sure you'll be able to see what I'm putting on here. I'm just getting rid of the pure white of this tag. I'll paint around some of this, but there we go. All right, so let's jump around here a little bit. I'm going to come up to my bell, and in my bell I also see a little bit of this yellow, because of course this is the tag reflecting in the bell. And so I see a little bit of this yellow here, and I'm not sure what is in the background here. I mean, I should know because it's in my studio, but oh, it was not in my studio. It was I was at a class, and this bell actually belonged to one of my students. She brought it in. So so this was the classroom. That's why I didn't recognize what was in the reflection there. But so I'm going to take some of this yellow and paint the similar color into these areas of the bell. Just on dry. I'm not wetting anything first. When we did our background, I also did that on dry, didn't I? You could wet it first, but only if it's a larger area. I see a lot of people will wet a tiny area, but it's not necessary because you can work fast enough to get the paint in there that you really don't need to do that. All right, so let's just come through here, identify where those yellows are. Doesn't look like there's any more. And I'm just going to give this a very quick dry just so that I can get back to my bell. So when I'm painting in my watercolors, I don't finish one thing at a time. I mean, that would be a lot of sitting around waiting for paint to dry. So I move on to something else while something else is drying, and I end up jumping around quite a lot. '50s in Massachusetts. I don't think it's that warm here, but it is kind of drizzly and gray. Had a real string of gray days lately. No snow to speak of here. That may come in a little while. Good evening, Anne. All right, so I'm going to come in now. I'm going to take a darker red now for some of my shadows. So I'm going to use a combination of alizarin crimson, and you can see on my palette that those two reds are fairly different from each other. One is more pink and one is more orange. But I'm going to start with a mix first of all. I don't want to jump right straight from a warm to a cool. I will do a bit of a transition. Okay, so I am going to start identifying where the shadows are. Kind of lost my line, so I'll have to make it up a little bit here, but I think I can manage. And this is like a leather looking strap. I don't know if it actually was leather, but it has that look about it. So I'm going to leave this edge. See this edge right along the side. So it's not a paper thin type of ribbon or strap or whatever you want to call it. Rinse my brush and blot it and soften this edge out. That's very hard for me to see because of glare, but I'll try to lean over and get that in there. Now I will get darker with this as I go along, but really I'm covering most of the strap other than just this lightest edge, you know, just to show that. So I'm looking how it tapers to a point and that sort of thing. And I do see one part in here which is actually should be background, so I'll have to add that in. I don't know where my voice is today. I'm getting hoarse. All right, so coming in, just adding a slight, and this is a fairly thin wash. I'm not coming in with really strong color yet. I'm going little increments at a time. I think I can actually zoom in a little closer as well. A little hard to see, I'm sure, from there. That's a little better, isn't it? Okay, that'll be a lot easier for you to see. So I'm looking where the strap kind of curls around. So you can see how I've isolated the bright strap, or the bright edge of the strap, I should say. And I'm looking at edges. Let me zoom out again. Every once in a while my camera doesn't know what to do with these colors, so it makes adjustments all on its own without my help. So there we go. All right, so it's kind of like a ghost layer. I'm easing my way into identifying where these shapes and things are. All right, so there's some darker lines in here, which are going to get a lot darker, but I'm just doing it lightly for now. And if I do it lightly and it's wrong, that's a lot easier to remedy than if I were to do it very boldly and get myself into something I can't get out of. All right, so then we have the knot. And this edge. So coming in here, every time there's a twist or a turn, you really need to look at the edge of that ribbon or that strap. I don't know, would it be called a ribbon if it's made of leather? I don't know. Yeah, you know, I don't know why it turns green on me, but it will do that, and it's strange. I just zoom out and zoom back in again, and it's all fine again, but I don't know. It just does that. Anyway, so I'm sorting out these shapes, identifying and just leaving behind those edges. So it seemed like, you know, I painted the whole thing. I didn't paint just the edges, I painted the whole thing, and then I came back in to paint the shadows on top. So I'll get a lot bolder with my next layer on this, but for now this works quite well. So this gets really dark right in here. And I am looking, is it a hard edge or a soft edge? And I'm softening as needed. All right, so now that I think it looks like it's making some sense now, I'm going to take some of that alizarin crimson and I think a little bit of, I'm going to use neutral tint. I have an option of using either Payne's gray or neutral tint as my gray or my dark, but I'm going to use neutral tint because I'm working with a warm color. I don't know if this is any kind of a sort of a common thing or not, but I find that myself, I tend to use neutral tint to warm up my warm tones, or to, sorry, not warm up, but to darken some of my warm tones. And then I use Payne's gray to darken some of my cool tones. So Payne's gray, because it has so much blue in it, will automatically cool down the color. That's okay to do that, but if I don't want to lose too much of the color itself, if it's a warm color, I will tend to go to the neutral tint, which is slightly warmer than the Payne's gray. It's also a little bit more, I guess it's more transparent because it seems to dry a lot lighter than Payne's gray does. Let's go alizarin crimson and a little bit of neutral tint, and that's going to give me a much darker alizarin crimson. My colors are not that wet. I didn't wet my colors this morning, did I? Well, let's get that remedied right away. There we go. So I'm just wetting the ones I'm using. So alizarin crimson and neutral tint, and I will have some paper towel available. I always have paper towel available. So just keep that in my hand here so I can blot as needed. And I'm going to reinforce some of this. So I'm going to identify some of the darker areas, and I'm going to come in to build those up. So tucking it in to little spots like that. Let's rinse, blot, and soften that very quickly. That all has to be kind of like one smooth motion, right? Rinse, blot, and soften. Because if you don't do it in one motion, it starts to dry. Because we're working on dry paper, and the paint you put down, it's going to dry really fast. So you need to move pretty quick as well. Let's go a little bit stronger here. Now when I look at my reference picture, I see that this part of the ribbon is actually darker than the background. So these sorts of comparisons are things that I mentally do all the time that I'm painting. The you know, I'm looking, is it darker than what isn't next to, or lighter? You know, it's a shadow, but how dark is that shadow? So I will use other things in the painting that I've already done in order to determine whether or not I need to go further with my values or not. So I'm blotting my brush and softening this edge. I think I'd like to go even darker still. Getting braver, you see. Now once I have the light colors in there, it makes it a lot easier for me to paint confidently and get those darks in there boldly. All right, so, oh, I'm glad you got your brushes, Jen. That's nice. Okay, so I'm going to continue on here. There's a little bit of dark. Let's get this transition a little smoother here. Rinse and blot. Tickle that edge. Tuck this one into here as well. It gets a little bit darker as it starts to twist, as the ribbon twists and turns. Now, as I'm doing this, I want you to think about things like hair and how hair works very similarly. You know, my hair's not curled today, but you know, if I had curls, you know, usually it's a lock of hair, like you know, a cluster of hair that will sort of twist and turn like this, and you'd have to shade it in the same sort of way. So you know, this works well for this band, but think of other applications where you can build it up slower and, you know, just sort of ease your way into it, and then come in and really emphasize stuff. You know, emphasize some of these darks and things like that. Rinse and blot. See, I didn't even take the time to really thoroughly rinse my brush. I mean, it doesn't have to be pristinely clean or anything like that, but it does. I did need to work quick. So I rinsed it and blotted it very quickly. Now, I want to go a little bit stronger right into some of these areas right in here. I'm going to come back to this one. Still think that one's a little bit light. Rinse, blot, and soften. So when I soften, I only soften the edge. The edge of the paint, that is. Only the edge of the paint. I don't pull the paint in any way. I just tickle the edges. I see a lot of people, and they go into the paint puddle and they pull it out, but that will usually pull the paint out and give you a new hard edge, right? So that doesn't work that well. Thank you, Susie. That was so sweet of you. So I'm going to come in here and just identify a couple more darks. There we go, just a little bit here. Lots of light in there too. Like it goes quickly from a shadow to a highlight or to a lighter area. So I did switch up my red there. It's not the same red. Not everything is the same red, so I have to look at that. And I'm noticing up here I've got another shadow up here that could be a little bit darker. And I'm going easily here because I don't want to jump into too much black or black looking shadow. I want to have some color in that shadow too. So I want to keep, it's better to get more of that warm red or the cool red in there for my shadow than to just put black in there to make it, because if you put in all black shadows or gray shadows, it tends to look lifeless, like, you know, kind of flat looking. Much more lively when you put a bit of warm or cool color into those shadows. So let's come into this knot here. Rinse and blot. Some people prefer to have a separate brush that they use for softening edges. I can show you what that would look like. So if I take one other brush, right, separate brush, this one's a synthetic, and it's rinsed and cleaned, and I could come in and just sort of put in my shadow. Let's see, it's pretty dark right in here. I'm going to rinse and put more of a red, just the alizarin crimson. Now I'm grabbing my softening brush or my damp brush and just soften that immediately because I've already got it in my hand. And some of you might prefer to work that way with it. Oh, Joy, you've got COVID. That sucks. Yeah, oh, that sucks. I actually had COVID in September, and it was pretty good. I think I didn't have to. I wasn't deathly sick, but there was one day I really could not keep my eyes open. It was. I guess your body knows what you need, right? And if you need sleep, you need sleep. So I'm coming in with extra darks here and really separating where those layers of the tag are together. Darken in some of these. I get bolder as I go along, but I am getting the contours. So let's see, I will need to get darker in this little corner here. Grab my other blotted brush just for softening. Now this, I had masking fluid on here, and I am finding that the paper is a little bit more coarse. When you remove masking fluid, you can roughen up the paper a little bit because the masking fluid will pull off some of the sizing and lift up some of the fibers as you're removing it. I mean, we've been rubbing on it, right, to remove the masking. I removed it as carefully as I could, but it can still make your paper a little bit rough to paint on. So one thing I can do in that case, and I actually did it on this tag, was I smoothed down the fibers, and then I put a layer of liquid sizing on there. So you can buy something, and it's called multi-sizing, and the multi-sizing it replaces the sizing, the starchy sizing that was on the paper in the first place. Because once you remove that sizing, the paper gets a lot harder to paint on, partly because it's so much more absorbent. that's what the sizing does, is it controls the absorbency of your paper surface. So once you remove that, it makes it a lot harder to paint into. So this multi-sizing, the one I have is, I think by Holbein, and it works quite well. I actually put some on the ticket here, and you'll see that it'll be a little less coarse, the surface that I'm working on. It'll feel more like the original again. Now I wanted to make sure it was really smooth. I might have put a little too much on, but we'll see. We'll see. And I'm definitely going to be better than painting on something without the sizing, though. That much I do know. Now I'm going to come up to, there's a little gap in here. There's a little gap of the background color in there. I'm going to fit that in there. So I'm going to take some of this, I believe it was alizarin crimson I used. Just pure alizarin crimson. And I'm going to come into that space and fill that in. I left that as a gap. But that was that space in there. So I want to make it look like there's background between there. There's a gap in the ribbon. There we go. There's a little gap in here too, but gosh, it's real dark, so it's not going to be much at all. Okay, so back to shading. This part of the ribbon right here, I guess it's tied up or something like that. I'm just going to I'm going to fake it and make it look like it's just connected through a hole in the ribbon or the leather or whatever. And that's just my own artistic license. I could make it just like the photo, but I don't think I need to. So coming in with one brush that has the paint and the other brush is cleanish. And I will soften edges with this brush. So as I soften edges, my brush dried out. As I soften edges, I'm only tickling the edges. I'm not coming into the paint. I'm just tickling the edges just enough to make that paint crawl out a little bit. So now my ribbon is starting to look a little more developed, and I can come back and maybe work somewhere else for a little bit. I know there's a lot of grays and things in there. But I want to look for as much color as I can, because one thing about reflective surfaces is that you're going to pick up all the colors and all the patterns in the room. If you look closely, you can even see me in the bell. Right, there's me taking the picture. So, but I'm not going to get into that much detail. I'm going to kind of squint my eyes and get the idea of the reflection. I don't have to paint every detail, but one thing I will mention about things that are reflective is that they are going to have very bright highlights and very strong shadows. So you will have the full value range when it comes to things that are shiny. You're going to have very, very bright, you're going to have very, very dark, and sometimes you will get a lot of crisp edges. So not everything has to be smoothed out, and you will get a bright white right next to a dark. And that is something that would not normally happen if you didn't have that shiny surface. So remember that you need enough dark in there to make the light shine. You need to have lots of light areas. Well, maybe not lots, but you need to have light areas that are very bright, and you need to have dark. So I'm going to set aside my second brush here for a minute. I find it a little awkward to work with that, but I wanted to show it. And so I'll use a little bit of cobalt blue in a couple of places. You know, I'll find some other colors that I can pop in there, but there's just a little bit of blue up in this area, as you can see. So I'm going to put some blue right along here. And I'm just going to soften these edges a little bit. Just do it immediately so that it doesn't become a hard line. I did miss a little bit of yellow, so I'll put a little bit of yellow up into this part here. And it doesn't need to be that precise. I mean, you could get really crazy about all this and just make it so realistic. It's, you know, like a photograph kind of thing. But honestly, it doesn't always make a better painting. Sometimes you just need enough. Oh, it looks like I've gone a little green again. Let me zoom out. That is so light. I think I might have to just tone down the brightness on this for a minute. Let me just adjust that for you. I want you to see it correctly. All right, let me just bring that down a little bit. Sometimes it's my light as well. My light can sometimes be a little bit overpowering, so that might be a little bit better. If I darken that down a little bit, maybe a little less contrast. And play with the adjustments. You know, I want you to see what I see. All right, so you should be able to see that a little bit better, although this doesn't really look yellow. I don't know if it's because of glare or, see, there it looks yellow. See, that's how it actually looks. But that's slightly better, but it's still doing something funky here. All right, well, we'll press on. I think when I get a little bit more in there, this will come together. So I'm going to come in now with a little bit, I see a little bit of this red ribbon being reflected in here, so I'm going to grab some of this red, and that comes right in here along this shape that I transferred. Then there's that sort of seam on the bell, so then it sort of jumps over a little bit. The line, that is, the line kind of does a jog to the left. And it comes along the edge. I'm just looking, where's that red shape? That's all I'm thinking. Where's that red shape? There's a bunch of it underneath here. There'll be a lot of red reflected in this because, of course, the tablecloth. So I'm looking to see how much of this red is actually there. And I'm leaving, you'll see I'm leaving some of the brightest highlights because they need to be nice and contrasty. Is that a word? Contrasty? High contrast. And when I first do this, it may even look a little bit Technicolor. It's bleeding a little bit because the yellow wasn't fully dry, but that's going to be okay. I think that's not going to be a problem for me. And I will come down into this area here. Let's get that other red, my orangey red, because that's how it looks to me. A little bit more red down in here, but my brush is a little bit dry. I think I need to get my brush a little wetter as I'm working in there because I don't want to have rough edges. I want to have fairly smooth or clean edges, so making sure my brush is a little bit wetter to achieve that. So first of all, I'm looking for what the colors are in my bell. And kind of establishing where they are. There's a big piece of red right in front. So right across here, Let me zoom out a little bit, just see if that color gets a little bit better. No, that's actually made it worse. Hang on. It's still a little funky, isn't it? Let me just adjust a couple of things here. I think for now I'll just stay zoomed out, and hopefully you can see it close enough. So there's a big shape in here at the bottom because of course the bell is reflecting that red of the tablecloth. And even though the holes in the bell are very dark, I'm still going around the hole, like the actual hole, because the hole has some highlights in it. So I don't want to lose those. I'm painting sort of around this. And trying to get as close to the edge without actually going over it as possible. I want to make sure I don't have slivers of white, of course, but that will fill that in. There we go. And a little bit more red right up in here. So because the bell is round, it you know, all the reflections are a little bit, you know, distorted, right? So they're following the contour. Do I find the paintings better when you're stood further away? Oh, absolutely. Paintings do look better when you stand far away. And that's one thing I think when you're actually sitting and painting something in watercolor, is that you're seeing it like maybe 12 inches away. Paintings are not typically viewed in that way. So yes, you need to stand back and see how the whole painting looks together, not just the one spot that you're obsessing over. Very often we will kind of get sort of tunnel vision, and we just get obsessed with one little section that we're working on. That's very common. Absolutely, I think stepping away from your painting is almost mandatory. I think you need to do it. I'm darkening up some of these reds because I do know that they will need to be darker. So I'm coming over some of these and just punching them up a little bit more. Reds will dry a lot lighter. They're a lot less vibrant. So you need to be fairly bold with your application. I had to do that when I was doing this background. So if you missed part 1, you can watch the replay on that. When I'm done this video, or today's live, I will put the link to that in the description. And vice versa, I'll put the link to this one in the other one. Most of my demos, I don't know who's new here, but most of my demos are like a one-day affair. But this time I wanted to make it 2 weeks. So right now it sure doesn't look like the reference picture, does it? But I'm going to keep going here because I know I need to have some of these light colors underneath. So the reason I do these bright colors first is because if you have gray on your painting or on your picture, right, that you're working on, what will happen is it's going to start mixing with some of their colors, and before you know it, you're going to have really dull colors. So I put these on first. It's your best chance at keeping them bright and fresh. So I always start light and work to dark. I also start wet and work to dry. I'm going to get a little more color in this little bit right here. That bled a little bit. I'll just blot that. And I'm going to fill in, this is a little orangey, so I'm going to put yellow and my red together and paint just this little gap in here. It's a little bit lighter, but there we go. So we're going to fill in all of these pieces eventually. That must be the ribbon that is reflecting in there. Yes, it is. When you start looking, you can start to identify what it is. Yes, if you are looking at things up close, you do see how messy it is. And I'm always amused when people see my social media posts and say, "Oh, it looks just like a photograph." And well, of course, you're seeing it on your phone, which is what, this big, right? So, well, the phone's not that big, but the image is, and you know, they're not seeing it as close as I'm seeing it, but up close, it's really not that polished. You feel like it is, but it really, you know, I've taken a lot of liberty in many cases. So I'm going to start coming in now with some of my neutral tint. So my neutral tint, I'm going to thin it down. I'm going to ease into this. I want to identify where my lights are and where my darks are. So I'm going to come into some of the sections here, and I will overlap parts of this and soften some edges. So I'm coming along here to this top of the bell. And right down into the words. I did mask a little bit here, but if by chance I miss something, I can always come in and add little tiny touches of white. Don't call the police. I can use white once in a while. Now I'm going to rinse my brush and start softening some edges here, because I need to work on this quick, because if I wait, I can't soften the edge. I have to do it while this paint is wet, so I've got to work quicker. Let's come down a little bit more with this darker color. There we go. Rinse and blot and soften this edge. So just touch the edge. Don't pull any paint out. Just touch the edge. The paint will make its own way out. Don't you pull it out. All right, so you can already see how the top of that bell is starting to look round. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Yes, you can zoom. If you're on an iPad, you can just zoom in on areas that I'm working on. I might be able to, now that I've got a little blue in there, I wonder if this will manage better up close. It's still doing something funky. Yeah, it still doesn't like that, does it? There, okay. All right, be that way, camera. So back to my neutral tint, thin down, and I'm going to come in pretty light on some of this and on dry. I'm not working on wet paper, I'm just working on dry. And I'm just going very lightly to start with. I'm not putting in my darks just yet. There's a couple of little gaps in this part of the reflection. So as I'm looking at this, I'm zooming in, I'm not zooming in, but I'm focusing on this little section right here. So that's all I'm concerned about right now. What's that little section doing? What shape is that? How dark is it? How light is it? What kind of edges does it have? And I work one little bit at a time when I'm doing my glass or silver or anything shiny like this. So I will work one little thing at a time. coming over to the right side. There we go. And there's definitely a dark that goes right across. So I'm going to take the edge of my brush here and just come right across with that. All right, already it's beginning to look like a bell. And I will continue these shapes as they come down. Now some of these shapes tend to change color as they come down. So I'll put in one color and I'll quickly switch to another color. So maybe a bit of this yellow. And this little section is all going to melt together and give me just the suggestion of those things. If I try to really do a mirror image, it almost can be distracting. I mean, it can work really well in some cases, but I think I'm just going to make this suggested. So I'm finding the shape, putting a line in there, and if they melt together, that's fine. I have no idea what's reflected here. I can't remember what was in the room at the time. Oh, this looks like it's a window in or something like that. Very distorted window. But it just suggests some of the shapes in there. So same over here. I will just come in and put a thin layer on. Skip and dance around a few things just to imply stuff that's being reflected. You don't have to paint it exactly. I will grab a little bit of green. Maybe I'll just grab this sap green because that'll be fast. And I'm going to put a little bit of green reflection in the ball here for the greenery over here that is reflecting. A little bit reflected in that bell there. And obviously it does not need to be a perfect mirror image because it's all distorted anyway. Now I guess I need to paint me. I don't really need to paint me. I just need to paint something there. So we will paint this shape, the shape of my phone. And a little darker on the end, so I'll go a little darker on the end. Right here, right there. And dark clothing. Now that looks like I was wearing something blue that day, so I'm going to take my neutral tint and mix it with some blue. And just keep going here. Not too much in my brush, it's not that big an area. So make sure you're not overloading your brush unnecessarily, or you will find you'll have control issues. So this is a darker blue in here. There we go. And then there's that peachy skin color. So let's take raw sienna and just mix a little of that into some of my red here. That'll give me a nice sort of skin tone. Coming into where my hands would be and my head. Don't really mind if it bleeds into the other colors there. This is implied detail. It's not exact detail, so it's implied. That's my head. Some dark for my for my hair, my eye. Gonna mix a little bit darker tone for my skin, so I put a touch of neutral tint into that raw sienna red mix, and I will just imply where my hands are, so where the shadows of my hands are, I should say. Not going to get into a lot of detail, not trying to work to make it look like hands. I just look at the shape and determine that that's what needs to be there. So that's it. That's all I need to do. Just implied. Now let's get the holes in the bell, because those holes will really make it look like a bell. So I'm going to take my neutral tint and I'm going to get it as creamy as I can on my palette. Let's see. I was missing some of the comments there. Yeah, it's self-portrait. There you go. Yes, a reducing glass. I actually have one as well. I haven't used that in a while. It's the reverse of a magnifying glass, exactly, and it makes you feel like like you look through it and it makes you feel like you're far away. So that can be interesting. It does kind of distort it a little bit, like a little bit of a fisheye lens kind of thing. But yeah, you know, if you're in a situation where you can't be getting up all the time, it can be a great help. That's called a reducing glass. And don't ask me where to get them, because I got mine given to me and I don't know exactly where to go. But now with this neutral tint at full strength, I'm going to come in and paint the hole inside of the hole in the bell, in this shape at the bottom of the bell. Now, there's going to be some definite highlights on the edge of the bell, so I'm leaving a little sliver, and this is important. Leave those little slivers of very bright light in some of those areas, because those are going to be the shine that you need to create. Does it have to be everywhere? No, you just need a sliver where you're seeing it in your reference. So, for example, right here. Most of this down here on this side touches the red, but I am leaving little gaps of white. And that's what makes it look like that metal has a thickness to it. And that you know, as it curves into the bell, or when you see the edge, it's like the edge on the ribbon, right? The edge of the bell is also going to have a highlight. So you need to keep some of those. Don't just fill it in like you know, like the bell is made of paper or something and it's just thin, thin, thin. It actually has a little bit of thickness to it. So coming into these darks, and I lost a little bit there. Slip of the brush, and I lost a little bit of a highlight. But I have white paint if I need it. I can scrape it out with my palette knife, or not my palette knife, but my retractable knife, or little utility knife. And I can also use this dark for some of the stamped lettering at the top. So there's a little bit of that over here actually, which I didn't put on, but I will put it on, and I will have to put some highlights on it because I did miss masking that. But so this is where I'm using the brush I'm using. It's a number 7, and don't go by sizes, because a 7 in one type of brush can be completely different than a 7 in another brush. So I usually will show you, compared to my finger, what size it looks like. But this brush has a very nice point on it, and that's what I'm using, because the point on a bigger brush is the same as the point on a small brush. You'll just find that a larger brush with a nice point will give you more options, right? So it'll give you the option of going very, very fine or laying down more color. So I tend to like a larger brush and just use the point of it. So I did leave some masking there. I don't know how well I did the masking, so we'll find out in the end, but I may need to put a little bit of white in here. I do not know yet. I won't know until the masking comes off. And but this is that high contrast that I was talking about. I don't think that this is actually painted dark. I think it's stamped in, but it is pretty dark. All right, so and I don't know if there's something else there. All right, so let's come in and start finding where else can I put some of these darks. I can see some of this over here on the left. Don't know what is reflecting, but there is something really dark there. There's a line here. There's a funny shape right here. Don't know what that is, but there it is. You know, people worry so much about painting things that are shiny, and really you can take a lot of artistic license with some of this, because who's to say that it's not reflecting the right thing, right? You do need some of those highlights though. Those are very important. And I'm going to go over this line that goes across. And there's some darks in this window here. Just imply that. A little bit more dark here. And I definitely think I could get a little darker at the top. So I'm going to come back to this section at the top and get that a little darker than I had it. So I'm going to put some of that neutral tint in there, and I will soften the edges that I need to soften. Such a chicken sometimes. I could go a little bit darker, but sometimes I just forget, you know, how much lighter it's going to dry. So put it in. I'm going to come back and rinse, blot, and soften real quick. Sort of the fastest motion I can do to soften an edge before it dries. That's your key to getting softer edges. It's just learning to work fast. All right, so I'm going to put a little blue into this. Don't know what that is, but there's a little blue in there, which I like. A little blue right in here, and I'm putting some of this on top of that neutral tint. And I think some of my reds are going to have to get a little bit darker. Let's see how the camera will work now. Well, it's better. It's not like it was. It's not going quite as green. So I'm going to stay zoomed in so that you can see this a little closer. I'm going to take some of that neutral tint and darken my red a little bit further. So this is permanent alizarin crimson, a little bit of neutral tint. And I want to come into some of these reds that I want to get a little bit darker. So there's bright, this edge here needs to be dark. I haven't done anything there, that's all white, but it's not actually supposed to be. So come into that, come into this little section below. And this, so I've dulled down this red a little bit, making sure that I'm getting a higher contrast, a wider value range to make this really look shiny. So this part in here starts to get a little bit grayer red. It's not quite as bright. One thing about color saturation, or the brightness of a color, it tends to be brightest right after it leaves the light area. So if this is the brightest bright right here, the brightest or the brightest color that you'll have will be sort of immediately after the highlights. So it'll go highlight, then bright color, or the brightest that color is going to be, the greatest color saturation, the cleanest color, and then it will start to gradually drop off and it'll get duller. It'll get duller and darker, I should say. So yeah, this side of the bell, if I really want to make this bell look nice and rounded, I need to come in and get this part down here. It's significantly darker. This one's almost a lost edge. Lost edge meaning that it's as dark as the shadow, so you don't even see the edge. So the edge kind of gets lost. And so I'm going to come in with a little more color here. A little bit more neutral tint added to it to dull it down. And work that in there so that becomes a lost edge. So you can see this is really starting to shape up as I come in to add these stronger darks. I see a lot of people and they post you know, these reflective things and they're too afraid of the darks. You can tell that they're nervous about putting that much dark into the painting, or they're nervous about losing an edge. You know, well, it's like you won't be able to tell it's a bell. Sure you will. Can you tell it's a bell? Yeah, that edge turns the same color as the tablecloth because it is touching it. Like it actually is reflecting in there like a mirror. So of course it can get dark as that. So coming in a little darker on this side as well. Once again, we're going to be kind of losing an edge. There we go, get some of those really good darks in there. It's still not picking up those yellows that I put in. You can see them in person. If I tip this, I know you'll see it. Well, hopefully you'll see it, maybe not. But let's see if I can make it a little bit darker just for the camera. I'll use a little, maybe raw sienna and gamboge. Raw sienna and gamboge is what I'm using. And it'll dull this yellow a little bit. Hopefully you can see that a little bit. Oh yeah, that's showing more. And this here could be a little bit darker. These are probably walls or something being reflected here, but they're curved because of the shape of the bell. Not because the walls are curved, but because the bell is curved and it's reflecting that way. And so the camera does like that color. It didn't like yellow, but it did like this color all right. Funny, isn't it? The way that works. Now, I do have to be careful around some of the darks that I've put on there. I don't want to make them bleed. They will bleed a little bit, which I guess is okay. That's fine. There we go. Yeah, so I'm pretty okay with that. With this reflection now in the bell. And I think the bell looks okay. Nice and shiny. You can tell the distortion in it and everything else. So you can see how this would apply to Christmas balls too, right? So if you had Christmas balls. Oh, when my arm shape, yeah, I guess when it's funny, isn't it? The way this this camera works. yeah, working gradually, for me, that's the way I like to work. But okay, so the bell's done. Let's get the ticket done. So this little tag, it looks like a ticket. We need to get a darker yellow, so I'm going to go just gamboge here. And I don't want it too crazy bright. So I could put a little bit of that red into it, just a little bit, warm it up a little bit more. I'm going to start looking for the shapes. Now a lot of these are sort of straight lines, so I do have to work a little bit carefully to get the lines reasonably straight. Don't have to be perfect. As I do straight lines, I'm going to pull my arm rather than use my fingers like this. See how the brush handle is moving? I'm going to lock it and pull. So that way I will get a straighter line. Sometimes I move the brush a bit to get started, but I've just pulled my whole arm. And you can see as I pull this line, my brush isn't moving. I mean, the brush handle isn't moving. It's not tipping back and forth. It's maybe when I get into the corners and I can touch it up that way, but for actually doing the line, I just run it right along quick. Just one fall swoop. Now this one is somewhat straight, but then I need to come back and tuck in around all the letters. So I'm going to just go one line and then tuck in around the letters. Now the letters are actually dark, but I want to tuck in this color around the letters because I want there to be some highlights in there. So I don't want to just paint right through. I'll lose the highlights. So I want to dance around and leave some of those highlights as I go. So come up into here. This all kind of connects together, I guess. So let's just go quick in here so that everything gets connected. Doesn't need to be perfect. Once I do the letters perfect, well, they won't be perfect, of course, but once I do the letters neatly, all those little bits that I left behind in that yellow will come across as highlights. So it'll work fine. So there's definitely more red up here in this corner. So I pick up some of the red with my yellow and get that in there. Now there's a whole bunch of sort of script writing here. So I'm really just going to have to dance around it. Now I've gone back to my yellow. I got that red in the corner, but now I'm going back to my yellow. And some of the areas will be more filled in, but then around the lettering, it's just a matter of, kind of touching my brush in between letters. I don't want to really see what it says. Don't want you to see what it says anyway, because I don't know if it's copyrighted, but so dancing around this. Nice bright yellow in this little corner, and I'm looking for the shape, and I know that there's a border on this, like this is a little metal ticket, right? Or this tag. So it needs to have some of that first very, very pale layer that I had showing through. So there's a real bright spot right in the middle of this. So I'm going to taper off my line. So let's go put some more red into this. And I'll start this with a nice dark and shape that edge there. And then there's another one. So there's kind of 3 layers here. Just hinting at that. And back to my yellow. That's gamboge that I'm using. And I will paint gamboge and let that taper off. And then there's going to be part of this that I can't even see where those lines are. I know that they go through. My head knows that they go through, but I don't want to paint it through because there's such a highlight on this shiny thing that if I painted it in, it would no longer look shiny. So you need to show that sort of glare that you get on things that are metal. And so I'm not going to paint it in completely. Now, on something like this, it's really important. I put that light wash in before I did this because I wanted to warm up that white. I didn't want the white to be as cool as this white, for example. I wanted this to be a warmer white. And so this white is a little bit more yellowy, so it's warmer. And that will imply that this is more gold. Oh, you're welcome, Erica. Actually, the song, it does not say Silver Bells. It says something else, but I won't talk about it just because it's not necessarily copyright free. So I'm not going to do that. But and I won't zoom in close enough for you to see. But anyway, so we're going to go. Some of you detectives can probably figure it out, but let's darken up some of these corners here. Remember, it's reflective, so I want to have that high contrast. So let's get a little bit more of this red up in here. And I'm going to soften that edge a little bit. I will come down here to this corner. There's a little bit more in this corner as well, some of this dark. And I'm not going just neutral tint here. I am putting a little bit of red in it as well. So here and here. And then I soften it just slightly. A little hint of it over here, just where there's kind of that lip, I guess, on this little tag. And anywhere I see a slight change of value, I might put some of this. So it's already starting to look like it has that shine on it, right? Even though I haven't got any of the writing on there yet, it already has that feeling of shine. So now I'm going to take that neutral tint. Once again, nice and dark, but I want it a little reddish, so I'm bringing it over here to this red pile to mix it in there a little bit, so I get it a little bit more red, actually a little bit more orangey red. So I'm going to put some of the yellow in too. My yellow and red will give me kind of a burgundy color. All right, so now I can come in to start to do the writing. I'm going to start at the end of the writing because then I won't put my hand in wet paint. And here's where I want to slow it down, really get some of these final details ironed out here. I could use the tiniest brush to do this, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to do it this way. And of course these letters are serifs, so they have the little, the hooks on the feet and the top, if you know what I mean by that. And it's possible I might come in with some white on this, but here's the thing. When you have something warm, like it's yellow or orange or red, and then you put you know, white paint like this on it, like, I mean, you can even just see, this looks kind of gray by comparison, doesn't it? So this doesn't look that great. Now I do know, I haven't tried it yet, but I do know that DaVinci has come out with one called, I think Titan Buff, like where it's buff. Oh, here we go again. So let's report this guy. Hang on. Port and remove. I'll move this guy. There we go. Okay, so we'll just hide these. Okay, so that person, there you go, they're gone. So oh, you like my nails. Well, I will give a little shout out to my person who does my nails. She put a little snowflake on them. Yeah, that's Tracy at Nails for You. So I told her I'd give her a little shout out. Yes, buff titanium. Yes, titanium buff is a warmer white. Oh, thank you, Sue. I've actually reported them. I've blocked them as well, so that nobody can see what they're writing. So, yep, it's some people don't have much to do, and what they should do is take a paintbrush and paint with me, right? Got to be more fun than what they're doing. What a boring life to have nothing to do but just put spam on people's feeds. My brush is a little too dry, so I've got to get it a little bit wetter. Caught that guy early. I'm glad I gave you the warning. People don't run away. So I know sometimes when those jokers come along there and they start spamming with that stuff, it's like people panic and they run away. It's like, oh no, I'm gonna get a virus, and it doesn't happen that way. They're just being a nuisance. Because somehow that's fun. I don't know. But so we'll come down here and make this lettering. And you can see that the little bits of the white or the lighter color that I left behind are acting as highlights. And the actual placement of some of these in the long run is really not that you know, not that crucial. I shouldn't say it's not important. It's not. It is important. I mean, it is important, but it's not crucial that it be exactly like the picture. Well, it's good that you didn't see them. Yeah, I just blocked them out. So I guess I have to put that warning. I guess that happens to everybody who does a live feed, right? Well, if I report them often enough, maybe they'll be permanently banned. That would be nice, right? Here we go. So coming along, just slowly picking away at these lettering. Not trying to make it too precise, because if I did make it too precise, I think it would look like an afterthought. It needs to have these little breaks in it, so it doesn't have to be pristine and clean. It can have you know, little gaps in the letters and things like that. A little bit less obvious what it says, perhaps. You can do it really realistic too. I mean, that's all personal choice, but I think this will be certainly enough to imply what I want to say. Hopefully I left enough of those lights in appropriate areas. All right, so there's one part. And I think I will actually take a smaller brush just for this last little bit of lettering, just because it really is tiny and fine. So for this, I think I will grab a script liner. Now a script liner is a very long bristled brush. This is a Winsor Newton brush, but this is a very long bristled script liner. The point is very small, but the reason I like to have something like this is because I can load it up and I can paint with just the tip, and then the paint I won't run out of paint. It'll just keep going. Yeah, script lettering is, well, I'm really just going to be using the tip of the brush, but I will load up the whole brush so all of it has paint in it. And I will just simply skate around here. Now, again, I don't want this too obvious, so I'm going to blot my brush here. Don't want my lines too thick, and I'm just using the tiptoe. So I can do broken lines. It doesn't have to be one solid line. In fact, I think it looks a little bit more glittery if you break up the lines a little bit. It will look like it's got more shiny bits in it, in other words. You see how I'm kind of not doing a complete line? I can do, kind of long lines sometimes like that, but a lot of this will, can have breaks in it. So don't worry if if you're doing something and it stops, right? You skip, or your brush lifts off the paper because you're trying to paint and so on. But keep your brush handle up straighter, and I can't even read what this says, and I'm not even trying to really, but doesn't really matter, does it? Here. Okay, so with this dark, I'm going to take some of that dark in. Let's darken those a little bit more even. Darken some of these little corners. Since I don't really have to make it just like the picture or like the photograph. I can just leave it at that. I don't have to see the whole thing. It's not the deal breaker in the painting, right? It's the bell is the star of the show here. So I think we're done. I will look at one more thing here though. I want to make sure that this looks like it's three-dimensional. This tag is still looking like it's a little bit flat. So it needs a shadow on the cloth. So I'm going to take some of this darker red and give it a little bit of shadow. I had put a shadow on there last week when I was doing the background. I did imply some of that, but I need an extra dark shadow just where it makes contact. So here's where I lock my hand and pull it along for a straighter line. And and I will just look for some little things. Oh, I've got a ribbon here, or a wire here that I need to finish too. Just noticed that. So there's this like little wire. I guess it's connected here somehow. And I need that highlight smaller. It's very distracting right now, so it needs to be smaller, more subtle. And it's probably connected to this this piece of greenery, but I see it over in the shadows. Not much to see, but not even sure if that's showing up, but oh, it is, yeah. So you can see that that now has that wire has a highlight on it. So you know it's wire because it's got a highlight. Here, just soften that a little bit. And you can tell that it's wire. And it's only because of that little tiny highlight there. That's it. You know, this was all just dark and that little tiny highlight. Now you know it's shiny. So as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, you know what? I think my shadows in my ribbon, they could probably be a little bit darker, and I would come in and do that and so on. So, you know, I'll fuss and play with this a little bit more, just tweak it a tiny bit, and I will, I'll post this on my Instagram, on my Facebook, and you can see it, and then you can zoom in and it won't do anything funky with the colors and stuff. But let's zoom out, take a look at our bell, and I like it. I think it definitely looks shiny, and I like, you know, the greenery and the ribbon and everything. I think it's turned out quite nice. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much for all your likes, your comments, your contributions. All appreciated. Thank you so much. And I guess we'll see you next week. Bye for now.